Let's talk about the boot process of a router. When starting a router, the first thing we see is the decompression of the iOS. We see pound signs, or maybe you call them hashtags, displayed on the screen. That's the decompression of the iOS, which is stored on the internal flash memory. You can think of the flash as the hard drive for the device. During the boot process and the decompression of the iOS, it's running what they call a POST, a power-on self-test. It's the same thing your computer goes through when it boots. It checks all the devices to ensure that the hardware is good, the flash okay, the RAM is okay, and the CPU is okay, there are no corruptions, there are no problems, and so on. That's the power-on self-test. If we scroll up, we'll see everything that took place in the POST and everything that loaded. We're scrolling up with the mouse wheel right now until we get close to the top. So here's those hashtags indicating the decompression, and it's telling us the boot image size in bytes. It gives us SHA information down here. These hashes are integrity checks for us to make sure that the iOS has been loaded. It does pass the integrity checks, everything's okay. So we don't have to reload the iOS or anything to that effect. We didn't get any error messages, which is fantastic. It tells us that the image has been validated. We'll scroll back down, and this is the legal language regarding what you can and can't do. Here are some cryptographic features. These aren't super critical things that you need to be concerned about for what we're talking about in this demo. Now this part gives the processor information. How many gigabit Ethernet interfaces we have built onto the chassis. This is good router information. Here you can see the bytes that we have for non-volatile random access memory or NVRAM. That's where the startup config file is saved. Here's the physical memory. This is the random access memory, and then this is the flash memory, where the iOS file is stored when the system is shut down. When we shut it down, it must be stored somewhere, and that's in that flash memory. First, let's type no. We don't want to go into the initial configuration dialog. There are a couple commands we do want to talk about. We want to look at the flash, so we can use a show flash command, and we want to look at the configuration register. The configuration register controls how the router boots up during that post. First things first, let's look at the image on the flash. We begin by getting into privileged exec mode. Remember, we do that with an enable en command. We type show flash and press enter. These are the files that are on our flash drive. Remember that this is the hard drive of the router. It gives us the bytes used by looking at the available total bytes. This is the size of the flash file, but specifically look at this file right here because it will give you the name. This is the name. This number that starts with 4, that's the length. That's how large it is. The name starts right here with the letter I, so you know that it is an integrated services router, a 4300 series, and it's a universal image. It gives us date timestamps and some other things, but it's always going to end with .bin. This is the image file that we have. It is the file that was decompressed into RAM. We saw that happen with those hashtags. When all of that information was being decompressed, this is where that information was coming from. And that's what we're running. This is what we see right here. Now we mentioned the configuration register. The configuration register is something that runs during the post, and it controls how the router boots up. The configuration register is used to reset passwords. Let's say you changed jobs, somebody quits, retires, or gets fired or terminated. Whatever the case may be, you replace this person and discover the person didn't follow policy, or perhaps put a password on the router that you don't know. You can use the configuration register to bypass the NVRAM. You can configure a setting to ignore that startup config file. So how do we see this configuration register? By default, it's 2102. Let's enter show version and press enter. Then it's going to give us a lot of information here. We'll scroll back up so we can see where we type the command. Here's some technical language. It tells us our ROM information and how long it's been up. It's been up for 5 minutes. And here's the flash file again. Here's the .bin file that we just saw, and then we notice the more command at the bottom. That means there's more for the router to show us. We can press the enter key, which will display one line at a time, or use the spacebar, which displays a page at a time. Let's use the spacebar and display a page at a time. Press the spacebar, and now we're getting licensing information. We're not going to get too hung up on this right now. We'll talk about licensing later. We'll press the spacebar again, Here's some more licensing information. Here is some information we saw during boot. We're almost to the bottom of this file, so we're going to press the Enter key. Right here is the part I wanted to get to. I didn't put it at the very bottom, it's just there, but it tells us the configuration register is a 0x2102. Now the 0x part indicates the number is a hexadecimal value. It tells the router anything after the X should be interpreted as hexadecimal. So it reads 2102 as a hexadecimal number, which by the way is a normal boot setting. That's how we see the configuration register using show version. Again, don't forget the show flash command will give us information about the files that are on that flash, including the iOS and anything else that is saved there. That's it for this demo. In this demo, we booted a router and reviewed some of the details of our router.